The echo of distant drums filled the night, pounding through the dark, heavy air above Tenochtitlan. Shadows flickered across the palace walls as torches cast dim light on the face of Montezuma II, his eyes hollow with a mixture of sorrow and unshakable dread. Outside, the voices of his own people rose like a storm, cries of betrayal laced with ancient chants. They called him a traitor. They wanted blood. He felt the weight of centuries of Aztec history pressing down on him, but the once powerful emperor's hands were bound, his fate now inextricably tied to those who had come from across the sea. He had dreamed of this moment, the end of his empire, the arrival of the pale strangers whose lust for gold seemed insatiable. They had promised him peace, yet the city was stained red, each street thick with the scent of smoke and iron. Montezuma looked one last time into the faces of the Spanish guards, searching for any hint of humanity behind their cold stares, but found only emptiness. A single ragged breath escaped him, whispering words of ancient curses against those who would betray his land and desecrate its sacred places. As the shouts outside grew closer, the reality settled like a poison. The emperor, revered as a living god, was now caught between two worlds, condemned by his people yet manipulated by outsiders. The power he once wielded had slipped through his fingers like sand from the rivers that encircled his city. Now the only certainty left was his doom. This is the story of the forgotten death of Emperor Montezuma II. A tale of betrayal, cursed treasures, and the dark shadow cast over an empire in its final days. In the dimly lit hallways of the Aztec palace, shadows seemed to dance along the stone walls as Emperor Montezuma II's captors whispered amongst themselves. Even under the distant stars of Tenochtitlan, a city that had once been the jewel of Mesoamerica, there was an air of doom, of an era that was splintering under the weight of tragedy. Montezuma had once ruled with unquestionable authority, yet now he was barely more than a pawn, held hostage by Hernan Cortés and his conquistadors. Outside, the sounds of unrest echoed like thunder through the streets. Whispers of rebellion had grown to shouts. The Spanish conquistadors were devils in human skin, they claimed. Men who ate flesh and drank blood, their metal armor and fire-spitting weapons casting an unholy fear among the Aztec people. Tenochtitlan was a city in turmoil, caught between its reverence for its leader and its hatred of the foreigners who held him captive. Montezuma had been haunted by the belief that these men were more than they appeared. For years he had feared the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy that foretold the return of Quetzalcoatl, a god with pale skin who would come to reclaim his throne. The arrival of Cortés and his men in 1519 stirred a deep-rooted unease within him. Against the counsel of his advisors, he welcomed the Spanish with offerings, presenting them with gold and food. The emperor's gifts, however, only deepened their greed. Stories spread through the palace like wildfire. Stories of the conquistadors' voracious appetite for wealth, of their willingness to betray allies and crush enemies with merciless efficiency. Cortés quickly recognized Montezuma's fear and used it to his advantage. He manipulated the emperor, playing upon his insecurities, and before long Montezuma was effectively imprisoned in his own palace. The people of Tenochtitlan grew increasingly restless, their trust in their leader eroded by his apparent submission.
By 1520, tensions had reached a breaking point. The Spanish greed knew no bounds, and they took as much gold and riches as they could carry, desecrating temples and insulting the gods worshipped by the Aztec people. The betrayal hit its peak when a brutal massacre erupted during the festival of Tenochtitlan, a sacred celebration dedicated to the god Huitzilopochtli. As Aztec priests and noblemen danced in honor of their gods, Spanish soldiers entered the temple grounds and slaughtered them without mercy. The massacre ignited a fury that could not be extinguished. The people turned on Montezuma, blaming him for allowing these outsiders into their sacred city. In the face of mounting unrest, Cortés tried to use Montezuma to quell his people, forcing him to speak from the palace balcony. But the once revered emperor could barely speak over the angry shouts and curses hurled at him. Some accounts claim that he was struck down by stones thrown by his own people, while others suggest that Cortés himself ended his life to rid himself of a now useless puppet. As Montezuma's blood stained the stones of the palace, a dark whisper spread through the city. An ominous curse that Montezuma's spirit would haunt the Spaniards, that his death would bring ruin to all who dared to lay claim to Tenochtitlan. For the conquistadors, this was just superstition, nothing more than the fearful cries of a defeated people. But as the days passed, strange events began to unfold. The Spaniards found themselves plagued by illness, as though a shadow of death had descended upon them. The Aztec warriors, fueled by rage and grief, launched a counterattack that forced Cortés and his men into retreat. The streets of Tenochtitlan became a battlefield, and the waters of Lake Texcoco ran red with blood as Aztec forces fought to reclaim their city. As the Spanish fled during the infamous La Noche Triste, or Night of Sorrows, they struggled to carry their stolen gold across the causeways. One by one, soldiers fell into the lake, weighed down by the very treasures they had coveted, swallowed by the dark waters that seemed to hunger for vengeance. Despite their escape, the curse seemed to follow Cortés and his men. Those who survived the night were haunted by visions of Montezuma's face, appearing in the dark corners of their minds, his eyes filled with accusation. The Spaniards would later return with reinforcements, laying siege to Tenochtitlan in a brutal campaign that would ultimately lead to the collapse of the Aztec Empire. But even in the ashes, whispers of Montezuma's curse remained. The land, the people, and the legacy of Tenochtitlan were forever scarred, as if Montezuma's spirit had left an indelible mark on the history of both his people and those who had come to conquer them. Cortés achieved his ambition of conquest, but he could not escape the ghostly shadow that seemed to follow him for the rest of his life, a reminder of the emperor he had betrayed. The fall of the Aztec Empire marked the beginning of a new era, but the eerie tales surrounding Montezuma's death continued to haunt the conquistadors and those who came after them. Stories of strange illnesses and sightings of ghostly figures persisted, as if the ancient gods had not forgiven the desecration of their land. To this day, legends speak of a restless spirit, an emperor who still walks among the ruins of Tenochtitlan, guarding the legacy of his people. Whether Montezuma's curse was real or merely a tale born from grief and rage, it has endured through the centuries as a reminder of the dark cost of betrayal and the power of a people's unyielding spirit. The treasures of Tenochtitlan may be lost, buried beneath the earth or hidden in the waters of Lake Texcoco, but the memory of Montezuma and the empire he once ruled lives on, a haunting reminder of a forgotten tragedy echoing through time.